All right, today we're going to start looking at some quadrilaterals. Quadrilateral is a four-sided figure. All right, and they have a lot of names. We're going to break these down kind of one at a time, but we're just going to go through, one a day. Like the types that we're talking about, we're going to talk about parallelogram. And then we're going to get into some special types of those. So rectangle. They have a square, rhombus. Then we're going to get into some trapezoids and kite. All right, so those are the ones that we are going to be learning. All right, we're going to compare these, and we're going to look at some special properties inside of each of these. So I'm going to look at how their sides are related. All right, for sides, we're going to talk about a few, the opposites pretty much is how we deal with these opposite sides. And we'll talk about all that coming up. Then we're going to talk about the angles. The angles need to be compared two different ways. We're going to have opposite angles and consecutive. If you guys remember what consecutive is, consecutive angles are next to each other. So on that consecutive, remember there's the angles that are next to each other. And the last one is our diagonals. We already talked about these. Diagonals. We already talked about these when we were showing inside of a polygon, building those triangles. So you guys should know what the diagonals are. So we're going to compare them three different ways. We're going to look at how the sides are related, how the angles are related, and how the diagonals are related. So the first one that we're going to do are parallelograms. All right. So parallelogram, there's a few things that you need to know. The opposite sides are congruent. All right, so the opposite sides are congruent. So that means if I know the length of this side, it's the same as this, and these are the same. Now, all four sides are not the same. That's going to happen in a square and a rhombus. But we know, for instance, if this is 10, then this is going to be 10. But this could be 12, and this could be 12. It doesn't matter. All right, so in the parallelogram, opposite sides are congruent. And we have two pairs of parallel lines. All right, so the two pairs of parallel lines, so these are congruent. They are also parallel. All right, that's our parallelogram. Now, some things come with that a little bit extra besides just those two things, all right? So the sides, again, we already said the sides, opposite sides are congruent. All right, the angles. We're going to talk about the angles. The angles, opposite angles are congruent. Consecutive angles are supplementary. All right, so we have two different rules with our angles. Opposite angles are congruent. So here, this angle and that angle is my opposite. However, consecutive, which is right next to each other, all right, so we'll look at this angle and this angle, are supplementary, which means they add up to 180. The next thing we have, I know this is getting kind of confusing, but we have all this stuff. The diagonals are going from one vertex to the other. When we draw our diagonals, they bisect each other. So in this case, this side is congruent to this side, or diagonal, and then here and here, those are congruent as well. All right, we will make a couple of things. We'll make a foldable, we'll make a nice big table, and we'll do a lot of examples with this. But here, diagonals bisect each other. All right, so those are pretty much the same thing. Opposite sides are congruent. They're the same length, so you'll have problems like that. So opposite sides will have problems like that. We'll have problems where the angles are the same. So they'll deal with throwing an x in there, and you just solve for x. And then consecutive angles add up to 180. So they'll be the same thing, solve for x, and then the diagonals bisect each other. So it'll be simple solving equations. So let me cover a few of these. All right, here's a parallelogram. If they know it's a parallelogram, all right, they'll give us the little shapes on there. So for this video, we're just going to assume this. And all we do is opposite sides are congruent. So this side equals that side. So m plus 1 equals 6, minus 1, m is 5. And then here and here we have n equals 12. They'll get a little more complicated, but you guys should be able to solve the equations no problem at this point. All right, the next one is when we're talking about the angles. So you have to set up the equation. The first thing is set up the equation. This guy and this guy, they are opposite. If you look back at what we had, opposite angles are congruent, so they are the same. So here we have 2x plus 10 equals 70. All right, and then you can solve it. Minus 10, 2x equals 60, divide by 2, x is 30. All right, so we have x equals 30. Then you can look at these either way. This angle and this angle, 70 plus 3y plus 20 equals 180. And you can solve this as well. So this plus this is 90. So if we minus 90, 3y equals 90. And this is kind of weird. Y ends up being 30 as well. So we talked about where we set up the equation with the sides are the same. Here we have opposite angles are congruent. And then we also have consecutive angles are the same, or add up to 180, I'm sorry. All right, we deal with the diagonals. So we know in a parallelogram, this is the same as that. So n equals 2n, and 16 equals 4t. Divide by 4 here. T is 4 here. Plus n, whoa. 9 equals 3n. Divide by 3, n is 3 here. So n is 3. So this guy is 6. This guy is 6. 16, and that will be 16 as well. All right, so 3 different ways they can kind of throw it at you. You need to know all the properties inside of each parallelogram. We started with parallelograms today. We're getting into the fancy ones, rectangle, square, rhombus, and all that stuff coming up.